sort of training goal number 2 is what I would describe as endurance training. So these are your higher rep types of training. Or essentially, as we start to come out of the strength phase, you start to go into an endurance phase, because in the strength phase, it just wants to feel heavy. You don't necessarily want to be feeling the burn. When we go into endurance training, we start to feel the burn. Obviously, if the goal is hypertrophy, then there are a million and one different ways of sort of building that training. I'm not necessarily going to go down that road. I'm going to just talk about, if I describe it with strength training, how to build into strength training as an example. That's how I'm sort of going to use it. I'm not using it for hypertrophy or bodybuilding training. So this tutorial and episode isn't about that. Because again, there are other things that need to be taken into consideration with regards to that. So if we take a beginner, what you might do with regards to reps and sets is, for ease of starting out, so let's just say it's your first ever training session. As a general rule, this is what I do with people. I will do 2 sets of 8 to 12 reps, and give them lighter weights than I think they can do. Why do I do that? For the very simple reason, if it's one of their first exercise sessions ever or in a long time, the body's gonna have a response to it. So they're gonna feel some muscle soreness. So we need to take that into consideration. So basically, I start them off. I don't throw them in at the deep end. I break them in, if that makes sense. So I start off with 2 sets, 8 to 12 reps, depending on what their goals are. But it's just a way of getting them doing it, getting them understanding the techniques of how to perform the exercises. And even then, I don't throw everything on top of them in the first session. I will throw some basics in the first session and then build as the sessions go. So, for example, with a squat, in the first session, I may just focus on getting the hips and the back in the right place. Then in another session, I'll start talking about, okay, let's look at foot position and knee position in a little bit more depth. It may change how they squat, but to start with, I just want to focus on, can we get the hips and the back in the right place? Then we'll talk about, and we may even add bracing, the abdominals in there and things like that. But as a starting point, 2 sets, 8 to 12 reps. As they then start building capacity, I will add another set in. So generally in the second session, I will add a third set. So they've already built up from 2 to 3. I would keep the same reps. I would aim to start at 12 because that's where I can use the lightest weight. And then basically over time, so over a 2 or 3 month period, I would build them from 12 reps to 10 reps to 8 reps, keeping it at 3 sets. And each time I go from 12 to 10 to 8, I would increase the weight a little bit. Again, just to keep challenging the body, just to build the capacity of the muscles to be able to tolerate the load, the ligaments, the tendons to tolerate the load. And if I was to ask them a question, certainly to start with, I would want maybe 1 or 2, you could even say 3 reps at the end of the sets. So if you finish the set, I'd say, okay, how many more do you think you could have done? Oh, I probably could have done 1 or 2 more, or 2 or 3 more. As a beginner, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So if you're looking, this is now for sort of fitness training. Again, it's an umbrella term, it's a broad term, but 3 sets, 12 reps or 8 to 12 reps, and aiming at sort of maybe 2 or 3 that you could finish on. Again, as you get further into it, as you build from, say, beginner to intermediate to more just sort of advanced fitness, again, you'd still be working at that 8 to 12 rep range, but you might then be looking at, well, I could only really complete one more rep, or that was all I could do. So a more sort of advanced human body that can deal with that sort of capacity, you would do that with. So you're constantly sort of pushing. And there's nothing wrong with pushing. It's just pushing, or pushing the body to its limits. There's just a way of doing it. There is a way that puts it at more risk of injury, and there is a way that puts it at less risk of injury. You can't get rid of the risk, but you can just minimize it, or you can maximize it. Again, as someone that works with people every day, I'm trying to minimize it. So I do err on the side of caution with things. But again, as I get to know how they can do things, then we can push it a little bit more. So with regards to endurance training or fitness training, general fitness training, I start a beginner at 2 sets of 8 to 12 reps. As they sort of get out of that beginner phase, they've learnt the techniques, their body has responded initially and felt sore, I would then aim to get them to 12 reps of 3 sets. And then over the next sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 months, I would bring the sets from 12 down to 8, increasing the weight. Again, there are different ways of doing it. You can get them to 12 reps and keep them at 12 reps and just keep increasing the weight at 12 reps. So you can do that. But again, over a period of a year, that's going to become relatively tedious. So you keep ebbing and flowing. So build the weight up, bring the weight down. And then inversely sort of change the reps and sets with that. How many times would you do that a week? Well, that can be done sort of two to 4 times a week, you could say. What you would start doing then is you would start training different parts of the body. You may do one more sort of bodybuilding type session. You may do one that's slightly movement based, slightly more core based, things like that. Core training is, again, another part of it, which would be slightly different. I wouldn't necessarily do, although I do them, but I wouldn't do it with everyone. That would depend on the individual. But like a core session, which could be higher rep ranges. But again, you've got to start at the level of the individual. So that would be, you would start at obviously a low time or low reps, and then build that up, add more exercises in, because again, you can shorten them. So you can have more exercises at a shorter time, or you can have less exercises at a longer time. Again, there are so many different ways of deciding to do this. There is no right way of doing it. The only time things become right and wrong is if you've got a goal and you're choosing the wrong rep sets and exercises to get them to that goal. Because a goal may require a certain type of output. So that needs to be taken into consideration. But essentially, if it's general fitness training, you can kind of use anything. It's just knowing where your starting point is. But again, as a general rule, I would start 2 sets, 8 to 12 reps. Then once they've kind of got used to the exercises, I would then go 3 sets, starting at 12, build down into 8, increasing the weight up, and then recycle that 12 back down to 8, 12 back down to 8, so on and so forth. Each time, each cycle, the weight goes up a little bit. So again, they're building that tolerance to it. So as a general rule, that's what I would do, but you can kind of take it any way you like. What we're going to talk about next is stability training, balance training, rehab training, that type of thing.